It's for my peoples one time.
What up, what up, what up? Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening live. Oh my goodness. As you can imagine, listen to those voices. If you hear those voices, you know the mod squad of podcasting is back at it again. And we're all in the same room, if that can be imagined.
This isn't a room, it's a studio.
Thank you. Well,
More like a bunker.
Yeah, we're kind of down here, in the end of the world, and this is the end of the world studios.
Hey, when the apocalypse hit, it's gonna be us and roaches.
That would have sounded like a Christian rap label 10 years ago. This is End of the World Records.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is Across the Intersection podcast. As always, this is AJ. I'm in here with E and A Smizzle. You can ingest our wonderful podcast on Apple Podcasts, on iTunes, Google Podcasts, and Google Play. As I shared last episode, we're now on Spotify. Go check us out if you ingest your podcast on Spotify. We're also on Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, and SoundCloud. And you can hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook. As we shared last week, we do have a Facebook group now, so go hit us up Across the Intersection and Across This on Twitter. I am on all social media at Divenomous. That's DIVENOMOUS.
And you can hit me up on Twitter. That is E to the V to the.
Yeah. And so, as I said, we're all in the same venue this week. So it sounds so how 2017 of us to be in the same room.
2017.
But we got a special guest with us this evening. We're actually recording at night. This is not our usual morning time, but we do have a special guest, and I get to introduce her now as friend of the podcast, Miss Andrena Sawyer. What's up, Andrena?
Hey, how y'all doing?
Doing well, Andrena. Thank you for joining us again.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and I'm glad I got upgraded to a friend now.
Well, you are the first repeat interviewee on the podcast, so you now moved from just a guest to now friend of the podcast.
Yes.
So from now, that's the new thing. If you come back and do a second interview on this podcast, you're now a friend of the podcast.
I'll take it.
So we for those listening, if you can go back, you can definitely check out our previous interview with Andrena. She is an amazing businesswoman. She was mentioned as a mover and shaker in Prince George's County, Maryland, in 2018. So Andrena's doing big things. But there, you start doing this long enough, and I feel like a veteran now. You start doing this long enough. Things pop in your mind after you talk to someone. You're like, man, I should have asked them that. I should have said that. I should have said this. And so we really brought Andrena back because we have a couple of those kind of things that just stuck in the back of our mind, as well as she has some new amazing news that she wants to share with the world. And because all of our millions of listeners, because life and death's in the power of the tongue.
Yes, millions of listeners.
That's not what that's actually not what I was talking about. That's not what the scripture's talking about either. But yeah, why not?
It doesn't hurt to be positive.
Yeah, we putting out that positive energy anyway.
Right, you're speaking those things. That's not as though they.
Yes,
gotcha.
There it is. But we're gonna get to that. But Andrena, why don't you catch the good peoples up on where you are? What's been popping in the world of Miss Andrena Sawyer recently?
Man, that's a loaded question. So first of all, I really am. I am grateful to be back. Anytime you get a repeat invite, it means something. It's a good sign. What's going on with me? So I have a new book called The Misadventures of a New Entrepreneur. And
Wow.
Of course, MCWEN. Yeah, that was loaded, even for me. MCWEN is still popping. P.E.R.K is still going. Enjoying Thanksgiving break right now. So I'm just living life still.
So you enjoying Thanksgiving? So where are you enjoying this wonderful holiday for the good peoples?
Well, for the next few hours, Atlanta.
Alana,
So I'm
as
in
they
the
call it down there.
ATL. Yeah, I'm in the ATL, kicking it with my family, having a good time here.
Nice, nice. Is it as cold down there as it is up here?
No, it's not as cold, but it's definitely raining, which
Wow.
I was not prepared for. Yeah, I was not prepared for the rain. But it wasn't like earlier today was kind of nice. Yesterday was nice. Just wasn't ready for the rain.
So, Andrena, speaking of family, you're down there. You mentioned that you're there with your family, and I know that right now we're in a really interesting season, just in America and as Black women, and just in general with respect to entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship has become much more popular, it seems, in the last decade or so. And of course, Black women are the fastest growing group of people to start businesses. But my question to you is, how has that gone over with family? Because, people from various cultural backgrounds, mine and other people, regardless, sometimes family haven't, or members of families have an idea of what you should be doing, and then you decide to live your own life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So that's a loaded question, Eva. You get right into it.
I know she just come in here and start throwing haymakers.
Right. um. So it's interesting, Eva, because being West African, I feel like there's some cultural nuances there, where when you start doing something like this that deviates from like the norm, you get your degrees, several degrees, start your career, go up the ladder. At first, it's weird. It's not accepted. It's just you look like a deviant. Until you start doing things that look like, okay, maybe she's not so crazy. Maybe there is some stability. Maybe she's making money. We don't know, but from, for all appearances' sake, it looks like she's doing okay. Then it starts becoming a little bit more accepted. But the funny thing about, for me, in my experience, with family, though, is like, even when you get to that stage where it looks like, okay, she's becoming a little bit more stable, then they start asking about the other things that entrepreneurship has cost you. So when are you getting married? When are you going to start having children? So it's always one thing or another. But with entrepreneurship, I think there are these stages that you go through where your family is super duper skeptical, and then they go to super duper supportive, and then they go to super duper inquisitive because they're trying to figure out what the next thing is. Which I get, is normal, but there are definitely some stages.
With the mention of MCWEN, this is one of those questions that we really wanted to ask after the last interview, but see that was back when you were just a guest. But now that you're officially friend of the podcast, we feel at liberty to ask these kinds of questions. So the name of your organization is MCWEN, Minority Christian Women Entrepreneurs Network, or Entrepreneur Network. I feel like it's an S. I feel like I want to say there's an S on there, but that's all right. That's not the question. We really wanted to ask you: was that name chosen intentionally, as opposed to something like Black women or African American women entrepreneurs? Like, did you intentionally want to call the organization Minority Christian Women?
Yes, absolutely. And the best way I could think of to explain the reason behind it is because, really, so minority for me is women of color. And so the statistics about entrepreneurship, good and bad statistics, kind of lump us all together. And so when MCWEN was created, it was meant to be like a resource to help all of us that are usually lumped together. So when we're talking about scalability of business, when we're talking about revenue, when we're talking about lack of resources, yes, it affects Black women, but it also affects Hispanic women. It also affects other women in the diaspora that are not necessarily, they don't identify as Black, but they appear to be Black women, but they don't necessarily identify as Black. So MCWEN is meant to be a resource for all of those women.
Okay, I know that was a question that we wanted to ask, and go ahead, A.
So what does all mean? Resource for all? Like, I when it comes to business, when it comes to entrepreneurship, when it comes to having success, one of the things in which that is emphasized is focus. Focus on niche and not necessarily being general. And so the question in which that I have is that how is that, like, do you agree with that or do you disagree? If you disagree, why? And however, if you do agree, how are you operating in that philosophy with your organization, seeing as though it seems to at least entitle cater toward all?
Right. And it's actually not intended to cater to all. It's intended to cater to non-white. So most business reports that you'll look at that address the issue of race and even ethnicity usually split up women and entrepreneurs into two groups. They're non-white and then they're white. For whatever reason, that's kind of the standard when you look through business reports. And so usually, again, when we're talking about some of the challenges that people have, they talk about the lack of scalability, they talk about the lack of revenue, the lack of bank loans that are available to non-white. So MCWEN is meant to help that group of people. Now, are we able to help everybody that falls into that category? No, we're not at capacity to do that. But we find that if the idea of being a woman of color resonates with them and that they've been directly impacted because of their race, when it comes to their business roles and even just their everyday operations, we want to be a resource for women. So one of the things that we do that's kind of become a signature component for MCWEN is our meetup. And it's a safe space. Once a month, women come and they just talk about some of these challenges. So whether you're a Hispanic woman, a Jamaican woman, a Black woman, Black African-American woman, or an African woman that just came to the United States and you don't, identify as African-American woman, we want to be a space where there's that commonality of color for them. So we can't help all. We just want to help the others, if that makes sense.
I mean that I hear where you're going. What is the distinction? Because you are kind of implicitly making an acknowledgement. It's like there's like when you say somebody doesn't necessarily identify as Black, somebody that comes here and then they're West African, but they don't identify as Black. When you say that,
African American is what she said. Just to make a distinction, sometimes somebody when they first.
I thought she said Black.
No, when they first. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so they don't necessarily.
Yeah, like somebody who's from another country, just arrives, and at that moment,
right,
they might not identify as African American because sometimes they might not even be American at all.
Okay, so I'm all right. Well, I thought I heard Black. Okay, at any rate, they. Are you saying that they have the same needs or do they have different needs?
Yeah, they will have the same needs.
And what are those needs?
Okay, so number one need that most of us have cash flow, money issues. So when it comes to revenue, the statistics say that Black women on average, well, let me backtrack, right? So in the last 10 years...
Okay, because now you say Black.
Right. So
no,
let me just clarify.
We have to get specific.
Okay.
All right, well, we're not going to belittle our guests. So
right.
Do you mean Black as an African American, Andrena?
AJ, I'm built for this. No, okay. I do mean Black as an African American.
Okay, I just want to make sure people listening
I'm built for this. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Go ahead. I love it. Go ahead.
But,
Eva's getting excited over here. All right.
I see. In the last 10 years, businesses owned by women of color have increased 164% in the United States, right? But revenue is down an average of $20,000. So while women of color are earning between $60,000 to $84,000-ish a year with their businesses, non-white women are earning upwards of $122,000 a year annual revenue. And so there's always that commonality of, one, how do we get the money, the initial capital? So we're talking about bank loans. We're talking about investments. Then we start talking about operational issues, like how do I market my business so I can earn revenue? How do I get customers? How do I retain customers? How do I even get their attention in the first place? So there are lots of resources, right, from the very onset of starting a business that we typically don't have access to, even though we're starting businesses almost at twice the rate that white women are starting.
Wow.
So MCWEN is meant to provide those types of resources. But then there's a whole other side of entrepreneurship that's not as technical, that's not as clear with the data, right? So the mental health piece, the family and work-life balance piece, that Black women have a really, really hard time with doing that white women don't have as much of a hard time with. So MCWEN is meant to address some of that data stuff, some of that technical stuff, but also some of these soft things that people don't talk about. But again, culturally, we see them at play, we see them at work. So whether you're Hispanic, whether you're African American, whether you're whatever, Caribbean, there are these commonalities that affect us all according to the data, and just again according to just cultural awareness and cultural, implications that we all know about.
So what are those things? What are those soft things that you're talking about?
So Black women, if you were fired from a job, so a lot is. Mm-hmm.
No, I'm just saying. Just to be clear, you did use the term Black, and I'm being it. It might sound kind of annoying, but I think that this
it does. But go ahead.
Well, yeah, I know, but I think it's important. It's important because what happens is that you want everybody to be on the same page, and when people are listening and they have different backgrounds, they read into certain words what they want to read into it, and sometimes we can use words back and forth trying to explain a particular thing, but it ends up creating more confusion if we keep switching out different words. So I just want to be clear. So, because you said people of color, and you're saying Black, which I am listening, but I want to be clear, because not all, according to the United States, not all people of color are necessarily Black.
Well, let's transition to the next step.
I am listening though, because she was talking about something. So I just.
Andrena, answer this, because this is the next topic that we kind of wanted to go into anyway, that we talked about.
Okay.
So we, for the listeners, Andrena had invited me to do a panel discussion. Had to be about a year and a half ago.
It was great.
Yeah.
It was fantastic.
Yeah, Eva was the host. She emceed the event. About how believers should engage with police, with all the police shootings, how we didn't kind of engage with that. And there was an older lady, I believe she was from Nigeria, and it was towards the end of the panel discussion, and she got up and she was very apologetic, and she was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't know." And one of the things that she said speaks right to this, and the reason I'm going here is because I'd love to get your thoughts, because as someone whose parents are not born native to the United States, I could kind of identify with some of the things in which she was saying. And for the listener, so this lady, older Nigerian woman, was saying how her community was not connected with African Americans because they're told when they arrive, they're told a lot of negative things about African Americans, and so it's sort of ingrained in them to not ingratiate themselves to African Americans or African American culture. And so you see this kind of we're here but we're not really here mentality. So share, because I know you're from Sierra Leone, so why don't you share a little bit about anything about that encounter, and then anything just from your background as it pertains to this disconnect in the diaspora, because there are Black people who reside in the United States who you're correct, do not identify as African American, and I think that's problematic.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's very problematic. It's funny because I remember going through a phase in college, leaving high school, entering college, where as a form of protest, I used to check other on forums when I was asked to identify what my race or my ethnicity was, because I was having a hard time. Yeah, I've had a very bicultural experience coming to the United States when I was 9 and not feeling African enough, but not feeling African American enough. And so it was my own personal protest when I did that. Uh, but I think it's problematic because bringing it back to business, when we have the kinds of issues that we have in entrepreneurship, it's like police brutality. People don't look at you and say, oh, you're African and not black or African American. They just, again, just lump all of us together. And I think if there's that disconnect, it's hard for us to ask other people on the outside of our experience to reconcile us on our behalf. Um, so if there's a woman sitting next to me who is African American and I identify as African and she gets shot by the police, where am I trying to go with this? Like, we can't ask white people, I'll just, flat out say that, to say accept us all as one if we can't accept each other as one. I think that there has to be a way where we can appreciate our different cultural experiences without it being divisive. I think that it's like church. We don't necessarily have to act like the differences aren't there, like ignore the differences. I think there's a way for us to celebrate them, but still be a unified front. And that's what MCWEN is meant to do. It's meant to celebrate our differences but unite us, because there are many more commonalities than there are differences, in our experiences, in our looks, in our preferences, even in the ways that we're discriminated against. I think we're much more similar than we are different, but the differences are there, they're pronounced, and I think they ought to be celebrated and acknowledged.
So, Andrena, do you think that it's more beneficial to all of us to celebrate the differences but have a united front than it is to continue to insist to the outside world that we are as diverse as we are? So, to the outside world, just letting everyone know, no, we're not just all black. There's more to it. It's more nuanced than that. Do you think that there might be a backlash where the rest of the world doesn't know what to do with that? Whereas if we are one body with similar interests and we come at it sort of like that, like the fingers on a hand, coming together for a punch rather than to just flare out and separate, that benefits everybody within these various African descended groups.
Yes, exactly. So I do think that. I think that the only thing is, I think that conversation about where we're talking about the differences needs to be an internal dialogue. I don't think that's something that we're necessarily ready to scream at the outside world yet, because when the message is not uniformed. So if I'm screaming, we're a unified front, and you're screaming, well, we're not really unified because we're so different, I can understand the miscommunication. I can understand the chaos, because the outside world, in my opinion, doesn't know what to do with that, because you're telling me you're black, but you're telling me you're African American, but you're telling me you're, colored, I don't know, archaic. So there isn't that uniformity. So I think that there needs to be a lot more internal dialogue about what are we really? How do we want the outside world to recognize and identify us? It's like when you're younger, you can fight in the family, you can fight in the house, but when you go outside of that house, you never let anybody see the fractures. You never let them see what the breaks are in the family relationship. And I think that as Black people and people of not Black people, but people of the diaspora, I think that conversation needs to be facilitated a little bit different internally, before we can even start talking and screaming, really, at the outside world.
So, question for you: how do you identify now?
Good question. So now I'm just Black.
So
now I'm just Black.
And Andrena, Andrena, I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, and the reason is because African Americans. So when I first came here, obviously well, you don't know that, it's not obvious, but I came here as a refugee. So citizenship was like a far off thing for me for many, many, many years. And so technically, even though my experience was as an African American, legally it wasn't. And so I couldn't I preferred not to identify as African American. So now it's just easier for me to say Black.
And Andrena, you say you are nationality wise Sierra Leonean.
Yes.
Ethnically wise, are you Creole or are you something else?
Yes.
Are you Creole?
Yep, I'm Creole.
Okay.
Yep.
So have you traced your lineage back here to the U.S.?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Is there any information or your family talk about any of that, or how far back does your background go that you're aware of?
So it's funny because on my mother's side, not very far, um, because of some of the experiences that my great grandmother had. But on my father's side, it's funny because we can actually trace it back to Ghana.
Mm-hmm.
But my understanding, we're from Freetown, which was kind of a hub and a refuge for former returning slaves, which is why it's called Freetown, for free slaves. That's where a lot of them went, and then to the neighboring country of Liberia. And so I have just come to just accept that there's so much mixture in the lineage that at some point, some of my people may have been here as slaves. I don't necessarily hang on to that. I'm a continental African. I'm an original African as strongly as some other people do. And I think a lot of Sierra Leoneans and Liberians think that way just because of how the countries were formed.
Right. Yeah. Because a lot of people don't know that. And when can you explain Creole? Can you spell it and explain it for the listeners who might confuse it with something else that it sounds like?
Sure. So Creole in Sierra Leone is Krio, and a lot of people mistake it for Haitian Creole, so what people in Haiti speak. And Haitian Creole is more French-based,
Right.
But Sierra Leonean Creole is really, it sounds a lot like Patois, like Jamaican broken English, but it has a little bit of Portuguese, a little bit of French in it. And the reason is because Sierra Leone was colonized by the Portuguese. And so there's a little bit of mixture there. We also have a lot of British influence. So predominantly broken English, or British English, I should say, and then a little bit of French, a little bit of Portuguese, but very, very different from Haitian Creole.
Nice. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you just got the lowdown from Miss Andrena Sawyer. So let's shift gears, sis. We want to get into your book a little bit. So it is, and you love these long titles, so I'm gonna read this whole title here. The Misadventures of a New Entrepreneur: 5 Things They Won't Teach You in Business School. So why don't you give us the background of that and what led you to sort of write a book like that?
Yeah, you're right. I do love long titles because it's always hard to narrow it down. And I want people to get an idea of what they're getting into when they see the title. But with this book, so a few years ago, I got a really nasty Facebook message from a lady who basically just went in on me and was like, "You always think you have the perfect life, blah, 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 blah." And I have no idea where it's coming from. But now I've come to accept that it's probably like some built up resentment. And I didn't know her like very well. I think I met her twice offline. And when she sent that to me, like it hurt my feelings. And at first I was like, I'm going to go back at her because she doesn't know me. And then I realized, I was like, you know what, social media does give people this impression that when you're an entrepreneur, you're like living a good life. And what she didn't know at the time was like I was so broke, couldn't even get gas money a lot of days. Wasn't getting a lot of sleep. My relationships were all jacked up because a lot of people were mad at me that I was putting like this business and this like crazy dream for my relationships. And so I started to write about all these things that entrepreneurship was costing me. And so that's what led to this book. There were 5 major areas that I saw my life had drastically changed in that this lady didn't know. But in my head, I was thinking, I was like, she's not the only one. I'm sure a lot of people who are watching entrepreneurs or who are thinking about entrepreneurship have kind of the same idea. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Wow. So is this something that you would, at what stage of entrepreneurship, whether it's whether it's still thinking about it or post business plan? Like, at what stage would you say that your ideal audience for this book would be in?
I think those in the first 3 years of operations, like those who are just thinking about it, like I have this idea, I'm putting the pieces in place, they should read this book. But those who are in those first 3 years, who have already invested a little bit and they want to give up, because it's so easy to give up, you're not quite seeing fruit yet, that's who I wrote it for.
Then I'll be getting one of those.
Okay.
I'll be ordering that book tonight.
Amen. Thank you.
Now, do you get more into the experiential element and the part where people really need to be encouraged, or do you talk about specifics related to whether a person should be an LLC or a S corp or whatever the situation is? You know, do you get into those types of details, or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, so it's a combination of both. So the format of it right now is that there are 5 things, and I call them lessons. So lessons 1 through 5, those are all experiential. But then in each lesson, there's also a business tip. So each chapter looks like lesson 1, business tip 1. As far as the business tips, I don't talk about structure, but I do talk about strategic planning. I talk about cash flow and diversification. I talk about goal planning. I talk about implementation and capacity building. But it's split up so that you get a little bit of technical advice, but you get a lot of experiential advice as well.
Okay, great.
Awesome. So, Andrena, why don't you let the people know where they can get your book, and how they can get a hold of you for all of that knowledge that you've built up over these years of being an entrepreneur.
Thanks, AJ. So they can get the book on Amazon by mid-December. It should also be on Barnes and Noble, and on Apple, and a few other online platforms. But right now, it's on Amazon for Kindle. And you can connect with me on social media. So I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, at Andrena, ANDRENA_Sawyer. And then on our website at perkconsulting.net. And then if you want to learn more about MCWEN, the website for that is MCWEN.org.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, that is The Misadventures of a New Entrepreneur, 5 Things They Won't Teach You in Business School. I had to take a breath before saying that. Andrena, thank you so much for rocking with us. We really, really appreciate you holding up your holiday vacation to come and chit-chat with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please go out and cop the book. Andrena is good people. I've known Andrena for a long, long time.
Ditto.
And the stuff that she says is a little bit more than just talk. She walks the walk. And I personally vouch for the stuff that she's putting out. So please go out and support her the way that she supports this podcast. Boom.
Thank you all so much.
Hey, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
Let's get started, I won't cheat you. Let me set apart who is my people. The ones who set in their heart to be believers. Press on to